Hey everybody, and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program RP-0. We are out on the launch pad today with a slightly redesigned DN5, topped off with our new Victor resupply pod that is bound for the moon. Updates to the vehicle basically just include new boosters. They're a little wider, a little taller, 3 RD-171s at the bottom of each one, replacing kind of that weird mixed 171 E1 variant thing that we had going on, which was just not working out too well. But anyway, and also untested new experimental engine on the top of this thing. Of course, we've done pad tests of it and stuff like that, and trying to get our reliability figures up, but this is the first time it's actually going into service, so we're going to see how well it works out for us. Anyway, so relative inclination is good, SAS is on, throttle is set to full, ignition sequence start. Good light on all engines, clamps are off. And 1.37, 1.36-ish coming off the pad. Not bad. Likes to poot and scoot this one. But yeah, I guess I've covered entirely the difference to the boosters. I was hoping to give the DN5 just a little nudge in its capacity. It's not a whole lot, but it's just that tiny little bit that might make it useful. Stuff that's too heavy for a DN2, which is our next size launcher. But we really do need a vehicle to fit in between DN2 and DN5. But for something that we don't quite need the expense of the DN6, it'd be nice to get some usefulness out of this vehicle again. Oh, I need to start my gravity turn. Look at me go. 0.35 relative inclination already, so we're gonna try to fix that, and I'm gonna get this little guy on up to orbit, and I will catch all of you there. Jumping now into the speddy uppy bits, this new DN5 performing very admirably. I'd say really that extra very marginal bit of Delta V allotted to us through the new boosters is kind of hit or miss. We are carrying some exceptionally heavy cargo with us today also. Not so heavy that the HG3 upper stage really can't handle it, but we are kind of operating at the very margins of really this platform's capability, but the cost savings versus a DN6 are very, very noteworthy, I should say, which is why we elected to do something with this platform as opposed to just making something, I don't know, 5 or 6% bigger that a DN6 would handle without too much stress. And there's booster set, they're down and away, and thanks to my superior piloting skills, we're probably way off from where we should be. We'll go ahead and boot up the Victor resupply pod for non-retractable solar panels because they're cheap, and hopefully get the comms activated. We did indeed, so we won't have a dead resupply just floating in the middle of nowhere for absolutely no apparent reason whatsoever, which is good. But we are going to be short on Delta V coming up on main engine cutoff, which is still quite a ways away, but just so we know that, yeah, had to adjust my angle. I was definitely on point with the piloting this time through, angling way up because we are already falling back, and this is probably why, this is definitely why we didn't have the Delta V to round out on the core stage. My mistake, but I don't know. Every vehicle has its own little intricacies on how it needs to be flown to orbit, and all of that changes very slightly with the payload mass. And I don't know, we're coming up on like 5 or 6 different variants, and I've been flying a whole lot of different things a whole lot of the time, so there's always going to be this room for error. It happens. I enjoy flying manually, which is why I enjoy playing this game so much. But we will start to regain our ascent, fully armed with the knowledge that we will not be in orbit by the time MECO cuts off. It's nice to have a nice buffer there on your time to apoapsis, or apogee in this case, so that we can put that HG3 to good use. Its thrust-to-weight ratio is going to be considerably lower than this core stage at cutoff. And there's flame out and stage set. And as we're going to come up here on our apoapsis, we're going to go ahead and plot for the moon. We're just happen to be in such a great spot that we might as well just burn for broke right now. We'll skip the pausing at circularization and just go straight for translunar injection burn, which is awesome. A little bit of assist from the RCS thrusters, and finally in some sunlight, we can start delaying the drain on those batteries. We're totally not going to make up for the draw from all of the cores that are attached to this thing, but we can do a little bit, and a little bit off course, but KSP isn't even going to recognize this as an intercept. No big deal. We'll just start to time warp out to the moon and realize our battery draw is horribly excessive. So unfortunately, we're going to have to ditch the HD3, the B upper stage. Really, by the time we got it to the moon, it might have had 100 or some odd meters per second. It will impact the moon, so we're going to plot ourselves a little radial burn to make sure that this does not impact the moon. That's going to bring us screaming across the South Pole and on a pretty good inclination to go for direct landing at Rosalina Memorial Station. There's also the inaugural fire-up of an in-service experimental landing engine, and it went pretty well. Now, you'll notice the levels of fuel on this are kind of excessive. It's because the cargo it's bringing down are also fuel for the engine, so I do not intend on running this engine for 11 minutes. It's got a rated burn time of about 480, maybe it was 460 seconds, and we have verified that failure will happen if you push too much beyond that. But we are coming in on our low approach. We have made our orbital insertion burn, or rather polishing it off now, and putting ourselves on course for our direct landing approach. It's a little shallow, so we're going to burn radial out for a little bit, just to make sure that we can actually get over the target without painting ourselves across a mountainside. That would be very beneficial, but it does mean climbing a little bit before we get to our target, and making a few small corrective burns on the way in. This engine has 60 ignitions, or rather it is rated for 60 restarts before you start to burn out the electric starter motors and cause very serious failures. But on decent approach now, we're going to start trying to zero out as much of our velocity as we can at this point. Of course, it will take several burns to get it right and make sure that our approach onto Rosalina Station is on point and not going to bring us up short. So now the really fun part begins, the part where I realize I have not flown a throttleable engine in about 1,000 years. And I'm not quite used to the very different technique that it requires. I'm very much used to pulse firing Asterisk 2 engines, rather than something that can roll all the way back to about 25% deep throttle. So it's interesting, I should say. At least in these initial phases, the throttle ability was very nice to make good, slow, easy corrections. Once we got within render range and the frame rate dropped considerably, it became a whole lot harder, and as more fuel that burned off, the less being at minimum throttle actually did us any good. Now, I kept this window open here just so I could monitor how many ignitions I had left, and also the current thrust and throttle number. But even at absolute minimum throttle, we were starting to gain altitude just because we burned off a little too much fuel. But we're also coming up on running a little bit past our 400 some odd second runtime, which made me very worried because this thing could do a whole lot of damage if it just happened to pile down on the center in the wrongiest of wrong fashions. And according to our navball right now, we are right on course to run into something, which is excellent when you're trying to land close enough to this base to attach. And we'll go ahead and kick that engine on, bring it all the way up to full throttle to do our nice suicide burn, and realize, yeah, we're going to land on top of stuff. So we're going to wave it off and start climbing. That was the unfortunate side result here. I was hoping at such low throttle we would actually continue to go down. Yeah, not a thing. And now we are way outside our landing zone. Predictable. Absolutely predictable. So we'll just try to use some very touch-and-go minimum throttling maneuvers to get ourselves back within range of our connection pipes. Of course, this is sped-up footage where it actually looks a whole lot cleaner in real time. It was very sluggish, slow frame rate because of all the billion parts we have out here, and I think the connection tubes and all these things being connected definitely throws some things off. which does make piloting, especially in these situations, a whole lot harder. But yeah, minimum throttle still gives us 132 kilonewtons, which is enough to climb. So unfortunately, this thing is actually too light to use this engine. So we'll just bring it in where we can. This spot looks about as good as any. Just if we could get it in there a little bit closer, maybe. A couple more taps on the engine, trying to bring ourselves in a little bit closer. Just if we can. If we can do this with one pipe, great. If not, too bad. Another quick light. And yeah, it's a little too much. I forgot to compensate for the hill. Touchdown. Okay. Hooah. Man, we've got to be quite close to the end of that runtime. Alright, well, we're down, we're safe. We're probably going to have to move the rover to get this thing hooked up, as it's probably going to slide down the hill some more, but, you know, oh well. It should be well more than enough to refuel our Uber and get our crew off here and onto the station, and in preparation for the next crew to cycle out. So that's going to do it for this episode, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. I really do appreciate it, and I will see all of you in the next one. So until then, see you later.